Welcome to the Church of Rock Show, Episode 3, The Beatles, Abbey Road. Sponsoring this episode is Nobody. If you have a product or service that you would like to advertise on the show, please contact us by either going to the website, thechurchofrockshow.com, and using the Contact Us section of the page, or you can send us an email at churchofrockshow@gmail.com, and we will see if we have a mutual fit. You can support the show by telling the music fan in your life about the show. Word of mouth goes a long way and would be greatly appreciated. If you like what you hear, consider leaving us a 5-star review for the show on Apple Podcasts. We want to get this content out to as many people as possible, and those reviews go a long way with getting the show to the top of the directories. Also hit the subscribe button to wherever you listen to your podcast to be sure that you never miss an episode. Welcome to Episode 3 of the Church of Rock Show, as I'll be discussing the Beatles' Abbey Road. At the time of recording this, we're in the midst of the 50th anniversary of Abbey Road. So I felt like this was the perfect time to do this album. And then also just to throw a disclaimer out there, the Beatles are my all-time favorite band, as they are for many other people too. So to say that I'm a little bit nervous to do this episode is an understatement. If not for nothing, I just want to do right by this album and right by the Beatles by doing this show. Not to say that I don't do my other shows for the other bands and other albums like that, but the Beatles definitely have a special place in my heart. They always have, and they always will. So let's jump into Abbey Road. Abbey Road is the 11th studio album released by the Beatles. The sessions for Abbey Road were to be some of the final ones, with the Beatles participating as a whole unit. Although the Abbey Road sessions are a creative finality to the Beatles, this would not be their last official proper album released. That would be the Let It Be album, as that project, which was filmed as part of the Let It Be film, occurred in 1968 and early 1969. Not to get too deep into Let It Be, I feel that to grasp the emotion of Abbey Road to the fullest, you should give a watch to the Let It Be film. The film is a tough watch in my opinion. It shows the fracturing of the Beatles, and after watching that, I came away with how these guys had come back together to work in the studio and crank out such a great piece of work like Abbey Road. Paul McCartney was very heavily invested in the Beatles as a creative unit, and he approached their longtime producer, George Martin, asking him to go back into the studio with the band and record one last album. Martin was lukewarm about the idea, as the individual members of the Beatles were having their own issues with each other and were in different places in their life. Paul was very demanding of the Beatles. I feel he knew they were the best, and the band was the best, and he wanted to squeeze every bit of creativity and talent out of the guys, which at times didn't sit well with the band. John, to me, was the polar opposite. I think he just wanted to drop out of the Beatles thing altogether, create his own time, and spend time with Yoko. George, to me, was like a million rounds of ammo getting ready to fire. He had so many songs in the can. He was ready to have his voice be heard in a larger way. He was beyond the 2 tracks on the albums he was allotted. He had in his mind what music should be, and the demands of Paul, and having his voice be that of the place of power, had to be a heavy weight on George coming into work. Ringo, I felt, was underappreciated in the band. There were times when he was ready to quit, and he had to be showed love by the band to tell them they loved him, and he was the best drummer in the world. They knew how valuable Ringo was, but he needed to be reinforced by the band, and of course I bet Ringo was tired of the infighting. Back to George Martin. As a producer, it is his responsibility to make these album projects the best they can be, and he needs to have a keen ear and the voice to get things back on track, to see these projects through. He needs the band to work as a unit in order to do his job properly. This was not going down during the Let It Be sessions. Here's a quote from George Martin. Nobody knew for sure that it was going to be the last album, but everybody felt it was. The Beatles had gone through so much for such a long time. They'd been incarcerated with each other for nearly a decade, and I was surprised that they had lasted as long as they did. I wasn't at all surprised that they'd split up because they all wanted to lead their own lives, and I did too. It was a release for me as well. Martin did eventually agree on the condition that the band recorded and acted like they did in the past. The band agreed, and they were ready to hammer out Abbey Road. The band had found a compromise to put their personal agendas aside and record the album, but there was another compromise that needed to happen, which was the composition of songs that the album would become. Paul was adamant about having a theme like Sgt. Pepper, but John wanted a straight-ahead rock album with no theme, no cohesion of tracks, and so on. As a kid, I heard the story of side 1 is John's side and side 2 is Paul's side. Now I find that all kind of silly in a way, saying that 2 members of a 4-person unit have their own side because it seems like the other 2 guys were just acting as session musicians. Sure, the philosophy around the ideas were formed by what John and Paul wanted, but George and Ringo make some of the most significant contributions to a Beatles album to date. We will get more into the tracks in a bit, and I'll be singing the praises of George and Ringo. Another dynamic that was weighing on the Beatles, aside from their want to work on their own personal growth, was Apple, their multimedia company, which they envisioned to be a multimedia company to drive the creative projects, but to sign others to their record label and create films as well. The company was mismanaged and losing money at a rapid rate. Here's George Harrison on Apple. Funny paper. That's what we get. We get bits of paper saying how much is earned and what this and that is, but we never actually get it in pounds, shillings, and pence. We've all got a big house and a car and an office. But to actually get the money we've earned, it seems impossible. Paul McCartney on Apple. It was heavy. Heavy was the operative word at the time. Heavy, man. But now it actually felt heavy. That's what carried that weight was about. Not the light, rather than easygoing heaviness. Albeit witty and sometimes cruel, but with an edge you can exist within, and which always had a place for you to be. In this heaviness, there was no place to be. It was serious, paranoid heaviness, and it was just very uncomfortable. Beatles Incorporated, that's what I like to call this, was a problem for these guys, and they found themselves as businessmen first, and Beatles second, and individuals last. The guys I feel yearned to find more time to be the men: Paul McCartney, John Lennon, George Harrison, and Richard Starkey. They wanted to find their own peace. Apple and the Beatles were not working for them. And I will get more into how the business of the Beatles influenced 3 of the tracks on Abbey Road. Early 1969, the Beatles were not that active in the studio after the Let It Be sessions. Ringo had an acting commitment to fulfill in his role in The Magic Christian. Where time permitted, the band did hit the studio to work on some Abbey Road stuff. On February 22, 1969, some work was done on the track I Want You, She's So Heavy. John and Paul had a positive studio experience together during the sessions for the single Ballad of John and Yoko on April 14, 1969. April 16th, the Beatles got together to work on 2 of George's songs, Old Brown Shoe, which would be the B-side of the Ballad of John and Yoko, and Something. They had another session on May 6, 1969 for the track You Never Give Me Your Money. After taking some time off, the band had planned an 8-week block of time in July and August of 1969 to do the Abbey Road sessions. A bit of a snag hit these sessions right from the jump when John Lennon was involved in a car accident with his wife Yoko Ono, who was pregnant at the time, her wife Kyoko, actually her daughter Kyoko, and his son Julian, while on holiday in Scotland on July 1st, 1969. John was not intending to be in the studio this day, but a 5-day stay in the hospital and concern for Yoko's well-being kept Lennon away from the studio until July 9th. John would have a bed brought into the studio for Yoko to rest and recover, and had a microphone suspended over the bed so she can provide input and feedback during the sessions. Yoko was a fixture in the studio by this time anyway, and I bet the other Beatles were fine to accommodate the bed being there because Yoko was around anyway, and I guess they were tolerant of the fact of her presence, and if that meant having John in the studio to work, then so be it. This didn't last long, as John was to play officially for the first time working on Paul's composition Maxwell's Silver Hammer. John hated the song and refused to play. He didn't come back to the studio for another 2 weeks. To me, this is the most fascinating story from the Abbey Road sessions, being John's sort of disengagement from the whole Beatles thing. This bit of information pretty much showed that John was done. He had decided to drop out and do his own thing and find a creative outlet outside the Beatles. And in a way, get away from Paul, as they were always tethered together with songwriting credits on most of the Beatles' work. Another thing about Abbey Road John was disdainful of, and pretty much dismissive of, was the medley portion on side 2 of the album. Here's John Lennon on the medley. Abbey Road was really unfinished songs all stuck together. Everybody praises the album so much, but none of the songs had anything to do with each other. No thread at all. Only the fact that we stuck them together. I like the A side. I never liked that sort of pop opera on the other side. I think it's junk. It was just bits of songs thrown together, and I can't remember what some of it is. Come Together is all right, and some things on it. It was a competent album, like Rubber Soul in a way. It was together in that way, but it had no life really. Paul's thoughts on the medley. I think it was my idea to put the spare bits together, but I'm a bit wary of claiming these things. I'm happy for it to be everyone's idea. Anyway, in the end, we hit upon the idea of meddling them all and giving them the second side a sort of an operatic structure, which was great because it used 10 or 12 unfinished songs in a good way. Abbey Road was well received when it was released, though it did have its critics. William Mann of the Times, that's out of London for those outside of England, said that the album will be called gimmicky by people who want the record to sound exactly like the live performance. Although he considered it to be teeming with musical invention and added, nice as Come Together and Harrison Something are, they are minor pleasures in the context of the whole disc. Side 2 is marvelous. Ed Ward of Rolling Stone called the album complicated instead of complex, and felt that the Moog synthesizer disembodies and artificializes the band's sound, adding they create a sound that could not possibly exist outside the studio. While he found the medley on the side 2 to be their most impressive music since Rubber Soul. Chris Welch wrote in Melody Maker, the truth is, their latest LP is just a natural-born gas, entirely free of pretension, deep meanings, or symbolism. While production is simple compared to the past intricacies, it is still extremely sophisticated and inventive. Robert Christgau of the Village Voice, opinion has shifted against the Beatles. Everyone is putting down Abbey Road. Shortly afterwards, in Los Angeles, he wrote that his colleague Ellen Willis had grown to love the record, adding, damned if she isn't right, flawed but fine, because the world is round and it turns her on. Abbey Road was a commercial success, reaching number 1 in both the UK and US album charts. The album ranked by Rolling Stone as the 14th greatest album in their top 500 greatest albums of all time list. And the single off the album, Something with Come Together on the B-side, reached number 4 in the UK and number 1 in the US. That's the brief story of Abbey Road. Now let's go ahead and jump into the tracks. The opening track on side 1 on Abbey Road is Come Together. Come Together was originally intended as a rally song for the California gubernatorial campaign for Timothy Leary, who is best known for his experimental studies with LSD. Leary's campaign was short-lived, but John Lennon had the working parts for some lyrics for Come Together. Lennon states in a 1980 interview with Playboy magazine, "The thing was created in the studio. It's gobbledygook. Come Together was an expression that Tim Leary had come up with perhaps for the governorship of California against Reagan. And he asked me to write a campaign song. I tried, but I couldn't come up with one. But I came up with this, Come Together, which would have been no good to him. You couldn't have a campaign song like that, right?" Diving a little deeper into the research of Come Together, it could be interpreted that the song is about the Beatles. Each section of the song related to them individually. Here, let's jump into the lyrics. Here come old flat top. He come grooving up slowly. He got juju eyeballs. He won Holy Roller. He got hair down to his knee. Got to be a joker. He just do what he please. That's Ringo. Here's George. He wear no shoe shine. He got toe jam football. He got monkey finger. He shoot Coca-Cola. He say, I know you know me. One thing I can tell you is you got to be free. Come together right now over me. Now John. He got bad production. He got walrus gumboot. He got Ono sideboard. He won spinal cracker. He got feet down below his knees. Hold you in his armchair. You can feel his disease. Come together right now over me. Then finally Paul. He roller coaster. He got early warning. He got muddy water. He won mojo filter. He say 1 and 1 and 1 is 3. Got to be good looking because he's so hard to see. Come together right now over me. You know, when it's amazing going through this project and going through these lyrics like this, I never really approached this song the way that I do now, looking into this the way that it is. And it's just really cool just to be able to see what exactly these guys were doing at that time and getting a different interpretation of the song. And Come Together is definitely a hard-rocking song. I love it, but now I just have a greater appreciation for the lyrics. On to the next track, Something. Something is lyrically simple, beautiful, and deep. It's not your typical hit love song. You hear a personal touch here in George's lyrics. He is living something, or at least felt something true and real. It is widely assumed Something was written for George's wife at the time, Patty, which is understandable because of the timeline in which the song was written and recorded, but George has later stated that the song was not for or about Patty. I can understand where he is coming from as a human being. That is a time in his life that is in the past, and he's moved on, so why would he give inspirational credit to a person that is no longer a part of his life? I'm not going to get into what I believe the story is because I don't know the story, but I know George was maturing and growing into a great songwriter, and a lot of it had to do with him being in touch with how he was feeling and telling stories about his view of the world. There was something he was feeling about being in love at the time, and it came out in Something. Frank Sinatra even stated that Something was the greatest love song of all time, which is a huge compliment coming from a performer like Sinatra, because I hold him and Elvis as two of the top vocal performers of all time, who are not much on the songwriting part, but they were in need of songs to drive their live performances, and both Sinatra and Elvis had Something as part of their repertoires. Let's take a look at the lyrics. Something in the way she moves attracts me like no other lover. Something in the way she woos me. I don't want to leave her now. You know I believe in how. Somewhere in her smile she knows that I don't need no other lover. Something in her style that shows me I don't want to leave her now. You know I believe in how. You're asking me, will my love grow? I don't know. I don't know. You stick around, now it may show. I don't know. I don't know. Something in the way she knows, and all I have to do is think of her. Something in the things she shows me. I don't want to leave her now. You know I believe in how. One word title. Such power within the lyrics. Absolutely beautiful. One of George's best. On to the next track. Maxwell's Silver Hammer. I'm going to throw this right out here in the beginning that Maxwell's Silver Hammer is one of my least liked Beatles songs ever. Not just on Abbey Road. This is Paul's first track on the album. It's so weird as the song has a real pop sound to it and nothing very complex but the lyrics are dark in their theme, but not too specific. It's all a matter of fact in the way that this medical student Maxwell is murdering people with a silver hammer. John Lennon hated the song and didn't feel like playing on it. He called it more of Paul's granny music. Let's look at these lyrics and see what's going on. Joan was quizzical, studied pataphysical science in the home. Late nights all alone with a test tube. Oh, 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 oh. Maxwell Edison, majoring in medicine, calls her on the phone. Can I take you out to the pictures, Joe? But as she's getting ready to go, a knock comes on the door. Bang, bang, Maxwell's silver hammer come down upon her head. Bang, bang, Maxwell's silver hammer made sure she was dead. These are just some crazy dark lyrics. that Paul came up with. This is absolutely amazing. Back in school again, Maxwell plays a fool again. Teacher gets annoyed, wishing to avoid an unpleasant scene. She tells Max to stay when the class has gone away, but he waits behind, writing 50 times, I must not be so, oh. But when she turns her back on the boy, he creeps up from behind. Bang, bang, Maxwell's silver hammer came down upon her head. Bang, bang, Maxwell's silver hammer made sure she was dead. PC 31 said we caught a dirty one. Maxwell stands alone, painting testimonial pictures. Oh. Rose and Valerie screaming from the gallery, say he must go free. Maxwell must go free. The judge does not agree and tells them so. Oh. Now look at that one right there. And that's just something that I always find fascinating, that it seems like some of these serial killer type of guys or even people that clearly break the law, they have their share of apologists, and the apologists are very vocal. And this is where Rose and Valerie are coming into play here. And it almost kind of seems almost a little Charles Manson-like in a way, where, I mean, especially when you have the female apologist going on here for the male who is the antagonist in this story, who is Maxwell. And he's the one that's kind of driving this whole thing here. And then here, as it says here, but as the words are leaving his lips, a noise comes from behind. Bang, bang, Maxwell's silver hammer came down upon his head. Bang, bang, Maxwell's silver hammer made sure he was dead. And that was him coming to his end. And even though he has these apologists, and many of these people who do these unsavory things, they do have those apologists, and they kind of thrive on the support that they're getting. But deep down, they know that they did something wrong, and unfortunately, or however you want to look at it, they end up coming to their own demise. It says here, I also want to say a lot of times after I take a deep dive into lyrics, I find out something new or gain a greater appreciation for a song. But this one, I'm just going to leave alone because I said my negative rant at the beginning of the segment, and I'll leave it at that. Maybe it's just me. I don't get it. I would love to hear from somebody who likes the song and feels something different about it, because I'm not the guy to tell the story. The next track is Oh Darling. This is a song about a relationship, and it seems to be more general to me in comparison to George's Something. Maybe this was something that Paul went through in the past, or maybe they are just lyrics he put together just by experiencing the world and hearing stories about another or other relationships, where you have one party who for sure wants to split, and then another party is begging to keep the relationship going. This is kind of a sad song. Let's jump in here. Oh, darling, please believe me. I'll never do you no harm. Believe me when I tell you, I'll never do you no harm. Oh, darling, if you leave me, I'll never make it alone. Believe me when I beg you, don't ever leave me alone. When you told me you didn't need me anymore, well, you know, I nearly broke down and cried. When you told me you didn't need me anymore, well, you know, I nearly broke down and died. Oh, darling, if you leave me, I'll never make it alone. Believe me when I beg you, I'll never do you no harm, no harm. When you told me you didn't need me anymore, well, you know, I nearly broke down and cried. When you told me you didn't need me anymore, well, you know, I nearly broke down and cried. Oh, darling, please believe me. I'll never let you down. Believe me when I tell you, I'll never do you no harm. I mean, look at that. That's just really deep stuff, in my opinion. We're talking about here, this is coming from a male perspective, and he's really just kind of just, you know, letting his significant other know, it's like really, I mean, I'm gonna do you no harm. But then at the end, where I'm coming from on this one here is that we're going to say, for all intents and purposes, the female, since we're talking about Paul McCartney writing this here, it doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't matter that he's not going to let her down in a way, but it's just that she's not happy and she just wants to get out of this here. And Paul, through his lyrics, is just coming in there and just trying to sell himself, which is, you know, really strong stuff. The song is done in a doo-wop style, which is something that I personally enjoy. It's pleasing to the ear. It's not meant to be a hit or anything. It's just really a solid song that can be appreciated by the masses. Paul's vocals are really good here, and he really gets into the song, and he sounds so convincing in stating his case to keep the relationship going. The next track is Octopus's Garden. Here is a song written and sung by Ringo Starr. It's a fun song taking place under the sea, and it's very colorful. Ringo got the inspiration for the song on the sea trip he was on. Here's Ringo. The boat's captain offered him an octopus lunch, but he turned it down. It was then that the captain began to tell him everything he knew about octopuses and how they travel along the sea bed looking for shiny objects and stones with which to build gardens. It's a peaceful visual, and I can see where Ringo would want to immerse himself into a place like this because his professional life is in such turmoil with the Beatles during this time of the trip, as it coincides with the time of the recording of the White Album and the pre-Let It Be sessions. Ringo had his feeling with his role that he played in the band. He felt underappreciated for his talents, and the other members would show him some love and bring him back to the fold. Octopus's Garden was a great creative outlet for Ringo. He got to write something that, in my opinion, is very good. Of course, it doesn't hold up as well as the deep and thoughtful songs by the other three Beatles, but this had to be important for Ringo as the song fits so nicely onto Abbey Road, and it's a great thing it landed on this album rather than, say, the White Album, where it could have had the potential to get lost in the mass of all those songs. It's also good that it lands on the first side of Abbey Road as well. Those songs are meant to stand on their own merit entirely. So let's take a look now at these lyrics. I'd like to be under the sea in an octopus's garden in the shade. He'd let us in, know where we've been, in the octopus's garden in the shade. I'd ask my friends to come and see an octopus's garden with me. I'd like to be under the sea in an octopus's garden in the shade. We would be warm, below the storm, in our little hideaway beneath the waves, resting our head on the seabed in an octopus's garden near a cave. We would sing and dance around because we know we can't be found. I'd like to be under the sea in an octopus's garden in the shade. We would shout and swim about the coral that lies beneath the waves. Oh, what joy for every girl and boy, knowing that they're happy and they're safe. We would be so happy, you and me, no one to tell us what to do. I'd like to be under the sea in an octopus's garden with you. Now, I want to go back to the lyrics here, that this is just something that I'm just freestyling, it just came to my head. Oh, what joy for every girl and boy, knowing that they're happy and they're safe. We would be so happy, you and me, no one there to tell us what to do. To me, doesn't that sound like Ringo breaking away from the Beatles? Think about his role within the Beatles. We're talking about an individual, I would say probably the least creative out of the bunch when it came to the songwriting, and that's fine because, Ringo, he had his role with being the drummer, and in my opinion, Ringo Starr is just one of the greatest rock drummers of all time. But he almost probably felt like being in the Beatles and going into these recording sessions was becoming a bit of a chore for him. And he probably had that sense that he didn't want to come to work. And work didn't seem like a safe place to him. And unfortunately, being in the Beatles and the relationship that he had with the other members was becoming more of a job rather than a creative outlet that made other people happy, that made him happy, and made him a lot of money. So him getting away to going on a sea trip, immersing himself into this imaginary land where the octopus's garden is, he's happy and he's safe. And it almost seems like that's Ringo to me saying, this is something that I yearn. I want to get out of this. I want to move on. Now we're off to the final track on side one, I Want You, She's So Heavy. Here is a love song by John he wrote for Yoko. The lyrics are so simple and to the point, so there isn't much to jump into here. I want you so bad. I want you so bad, it's driving me mad, it's driving me mad. And then as it goes into the meandering, she's so heavy, 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 heavy. What else can you really say? And heavy is the word there. The song is just really heavy in itself. John also wrote some very deep lyrics and personal songs for Yoko, more on his solo work. But let's look at Yoko Ono from a different light, from what many people, the Beatles, do ultimately heal what they do see is they actually see as her being a heel and being a bad guy and being the person that caused the Beatles to break up. Yoko is a true artist. She does not come off as the sweetest person in the world. Even as time has gone on, Yoko is very direct and honest and has her feelings about things, and she doesn't give a shit what type of feather she ruffles. I Want You, She's So Heavy encapsulates this, and John dug the strong person Yoko is, and in many ways, people like Yoko are very simple beyond the complex nature they show. I mean, just read the lyrics. I mean, it's totally about her. There's not much to say lyrically with this song, but musically, this is one of the heaviest tracks that the Beatles ever have recorded, and this is one of my favorite tracks on the album. There's fire in the lyrics, and there's fire in the way the Beatles play on this track. There's fire in John's vocals and fire in Paul's backing vocals. The song has that bluesy sound to it, and then as the song builds, it gets heavier, especially in the long instrumental jam to close out the track out. And it ends abruptly, which is so freaking cool in my opinion, because why not? The song builds up to this frenzy, and just having it fade out, almost toning it down, would not do it justice. So having that abrupt stop is just really, really just the most fitting way to end this track. George Harrison's Here Comes the Sun opens side 2 of Abbey Road. Here Comes the Sun. It's another beauty by George, where he creates something special and uplifting in the midst of angst and stress. George wrote this song in Eric Clapton's garden as a bit of a personal therapy to say, needing to take a break from the business of the Beatles and dealing with finances and meetings, etc. If you are in a part of a world where you see distinct changes in season like I do, you can relate very much to this song, as George was writing this on the basis of England's change in season. George wrote this in April of 1968, just as winter was leading into spring. Here is George on Here Comes the Sun. Here Comes the Sun was written at the time when Apple was getting like school, where we had to go and be businessmen, sign this and sign that. Anyway, it seems as if winter in England goes on forever. By the time spring comes, you really deserve it. So one day I decided I was going to sag off Apple, and I went over to Eric Clapton's house. The relief of not having to go and see all those dopey accountants was wonderful. And I walked around the garden with one of Eric's acoustic guitars and wrote Here Comes the Sun. I feel the same way about winter, and when spring comes after enduring the cold and the snow, I feel like we all earned a little bit of relief, and the warmth and rebirth of spring is a reward. Whenever I am feeling down or depressed, Here Comes the Sun is a song I go to. And Here Comes the Sun for me is a song of hope. Let's look at the lyrics and see why. Here comes the sun. Here comes the sun, I say. It's all right. Little darling, it's been a long, cold, lonely winter. Little darling, it feels like years since it's been here. Here comes the sun. Here comes the sun. And I say, it's all right. Little darling, the smiles are returning to the faces. Little darling, it seems like years since it's been here. Here comes the sun. Here comes the sun. And I say, it's all right. Sun, 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 here it comes. And that's repeated 5 times. Little darling, I feel that ice is slowly melting. Little darling, it seems like years since it's been clear. Here comes the sun. Here comes the sun. And I say, it's all right. There's so much emotion being poured into this song, and it's so George. He was such a cool and spiritual guy who obviously had his frustrations with life during this period of the Beatles, but he was able to work through this and pull this corner of bliss and share it with the world. It's just beautiful. The next track is Because. I'm going to send this one over to the Beatles to talk to because they hit everything important. John Lennon. Yoko was playing Moonlight Sonata on the piano. She was classically trained. I said, can you play those chords backward? And wrote Because around them. The lyrics speak for themselves. They're clear. No bullshit. No imagery. No obscure references. Paul McCartney. I wouldn't mind betting Yoko was in on writing of that. It's rather her kind of writing. Wind, sky, and earth are recurring. It's straight out of Grapefruit, and John was heavily influenced by her at the time. George Harrison. John wrote this tune. The backing is a bit like Beethoven, and three-part harmony right throughout. Paul usually writes the sweeter tunes, and John writes the sort of more the rave up things or freakier things. But John's getting to where he doesn't want to. He just wants to write 12 bars. But you can't deny it. I think this is possibly my favorite one on the album. The lyrics were so simple. The harmony was pretty difficult to sing. We had to really learn it. But I think that's one of the tunes that will impress most people. It's really good. Here are the lyrics. Because the world is round, it turns me on. Because the world is round, ah. Because the wind is high, it blows my mind. Because the wind is high, ah. Love is old, love is new. Love is all, love is you. Because the sky is blue, it makes me cry. Because the sky is blue, ah. Again, there isn't really much more I could contribute to that the Beatles themselves didn't share with their opinions on because it's just it's a beautiful song. There's just a lot of nature and a lot of air within that song. It's just really beautiful. Can't get enough of it. The next track is You Never Give Me Your Money. Here is where the side 2 medley starts. Watching what was going on during the Let It Be sessions and Paul's desire to get the band back together for what would become Abbey Road, it would appear that he is really gung-ho about the Beatles as a creative outfit and a business, but he too was getting fatigued by everything that was being told through You Never Give Me Your Money. Here's Paul on You Never Give Me Your Money. This was me directly lambasting Alan Klein's attitude to us. No money, just funny paper. All promises, it never works out. It's basically a song about no faith in the person that found its way into the medley of Abbey Road. John saw the humor in it. George also uses the term funny paper during these times. I look at this in modern terms as we've become a funny paper society. There's no real cash. We are just transactions where funds get dumped into an account. Then those numbers are funneled off to other entities, which are those things that we call bills. And if we are fortunate, the final tally is a black number, and we start the process all over again the next month. You can see where the death of Brian Epstein took its toll on the Beatles. Not only did they lose a friend and a confidant, but they had to do more of the work on the business end. And that's never a great position for an artist to be in, having to shoulder that responsibility and to do the job which creates the paper. Having to manage the money and all the bullshit that goes along with it sucked the Beatles for which are only accentuated in the strain between them. The lyrics are just crazy powerful. You never give me your money, you only give me your funny paper, and in the middle of negotiations, you break down. I never give you my number, I only give you my situation, and in the middle of investigation, I break down. And hearing that about breaking down, you have two different words. First of all, it's a negotiation. Whenever you go through a negotiation, it's a tough negotiation, and both sides are very steadfast as they have their position be the final position. You're going to have breakdowns within that negotiation, and that's what Paul's talking about in the first verses here of You Never Give Me Your Money. And then in the second part here is like, I never give you my number, I only give you my situation. In the middle of an investigation, I break down. That's almost, to me, that's almost like him like really emotionally breaking down in him talking to the other Beatles. It's him saying like, man, how did we get to this point? It's like this position that we're in kind of sucks right now. I mean, before we were this creative unit and we were great friends. And now that we have this business and it's just sucking the life out of us and it's sucking the life out of our friendships. And I'm sure that all four of these guys had their moments where they were just kind of just drained emotionally, and they had these times when they just wanted to break down and cry. Now let's get back into the lyrics. Out of college, money spent, see no future, pay no rent, all the money's gone. Any jobber got the sack, Monday morning, turning back. Yellow lorry slow, nowhere to go. But oh, that magic feeling, nowhere to go. Oh, that magic feeling, nowhere to go, nowhere to go. One sweet dream, pick up the bags, get in the limousine. Now, here's one of the things here. Like, I want to, before I move on to this one, I should have stopped myself before that. But here's where you see the Paul talking about getting away from all this here, even if it's just temporarily. One sweet dream, pick up the bags, get in the limousine. Soon we'll be away from here. Step on the gas and wipe the tear away. One sweet dream came true today. Came true today. Yes, it did. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All good children go to heaven. In my mind, I always considered You Never Give Me Your Money as a separate track from the rest of the medley, as I see it as a complete thought and as a song that can stand on its own merit. But as the outro goes with the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all good children go to heaven repeated, the instrumentation does, however, morph into the next track, which is Sun King. For the rest of the medley, I'm going to take this on as a whole, which consists of the track Sun King, Mean Mr. Mustard, Polythene Pam, She Came In Through the Bathroom Window, Golden Slumbers, Carry That Weight, and then finally into the end. I'm going to get right into an opinion piece here, and I echo what John says about the medley as a whole. I'm personally not a fan of it, but I can appreciate it for what it is, as it's something that is part of the album. It gives the album a bit of charm and something unique, which is like no other on any other Beatles album. When I was doing my research, I would see that a genre used for Abbey Road was progressive rock, which in my mind gave me a little chuckle because of what I perceive as progressive rock. To think that the Beatles are like a band like Yes or Genesis, or going further down rabbit holes of prog, I'm playing the game in my mind that this is not like that. But when you take a step back, this is of course a straight ahead rock album, but there are influences that the Beatles are providing to the prog rock bands that we all know and love. Prog rock pushes the envelope in a lot of ways, and it's very experimental. The medley is an experiment that the Beatles are formulating. Of course, we never get a chance to see what was next when it comes to them as a unit. Would they take on another shot at doing a progressive opus? Would they have moved into a prog-like suite where it was more focused and had a distinct theme rather than taking smaller pieces like that of the medley and just run them together more like a jam rather than a suite? The Abbey Road medley was not the first rock suite, but you had to figure it had some sort of influence on progressive rock. Though the medley is not a favorite of mine, there are a few personal highlights I would like to point out. The first track is She Came In Through the Bathroom Window. The Beatles version is not my favorite. That distinction goes to Joe Cocker's version. The track on the medley is smack in the middle of it, and it's just a piece, but Joe Cocker makes the track stand alone and let it breathe, and he does make it his own, but does not stray too far from what the Beatles' take on the song is. It's just a fun song. Now, I want to talk just briefly about going into Carry That Weight, and that starts bringing the medley full circle, as it's a lyrical bookend to You Never Give Me Your Money. Here are the lyrics, and they're, again, the heaviness too that goes along with You Never Give Me Your Money. It says, boy, you got to carry that weight a long time. Boy, you got to carry that weight a long time. I never give you my pillow. I only send you my invitation, and in the middle of celebrations, I break down. There we go. We're getting back to I break down. And looking at this here, when I look at the lines, I never give you my pillow. To me, it's telling me like, okay, I'm just going to give you my pillow here. There's no strings attached. Take it. You need it. But then it goes, I only send you my invitation. See, now the Beatles were probably more along the lines where they would just kind of drop in on one another, or they would just see each other so much. It was just kind of like more of like an organic relationship. But now I only send you my invitation. Think about for any of you that are in business, Everything is invitation based when it comes to, because we have calendars and we need to have that invite to make sure that the person's available. And that's what the Beatles were becoming now. It's like, all right, are you available at this time? Which again, just kind of sucked the life out of them. And just to wrap this up, and then it ends up here. Boy, you got to carry that weight a long time. Boy, you got to carry that weight. You're going to carry that weight a long time. Again, probably talking about Apple. I'm sure that they probably saw Apple as more of a permanent thing and something that was going to be along and around their lives all the time. It was just something that they were going to have to carry with it. And it was a burden that they did carry with them for a few years after that they broke up. So it wasn't like just because the Beatles dissolved, they still had to deal with each other on a business end. So yeah, they were carrying that weight. And then eventually it just kind of just all just went away and dissolved, and probably to the relief of everybody involved. And then finally here, the end. This is really is the true final Beatles track, in my opinion. It's almost like a eulogy. And after doing something like this, how can you come back? I mean, it's a cool jam, and it sounds like the guys were having fun with this and really enjoying the loose moment of playing together. And there's a one-off drum solo by Ringo, which is something he and the other Beatles were not fond of, but it's cool that Ringo got a bit of a moment to show his skills and have his drum playing featured on a Beatles track so significantly. Lyrically, again, simple. Oh yeah, all right, are you going to be in my dreams tonight? And then it finally ends with, and it's very deep. And in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make. I wish that the album ended there. And in many ways, I wish that the Let It Be album was released before Abbey Road. But we know in music and other lines of business, what is ideal may not come to fruition. There is one last track on Abbey Road, and it's the 23-second Her Majesty, which is sort of a hidden track on the album, as it starts 14 seconds after the end ends. And the track is not listed on original runs of the album. Again, here are the Beatles being trendsetters. I go back to the days of the CD in the 90s where the albums there was many albums that would have hidden tracks. The Beatles were doing the hidden track thing in 1969, of course, and after the initial run of the sleeve, Her Majesty was listed as a track, and by this time, many who cared for the album knew Her Majesty was on there, but it still would have been cool if Her Majesty was never listed on Abbey Road. Her Majesty was originally supposed to be part of the medley between Me, Mr. Mustard, and Polythene Pam. I don't know how I feel about it, but I can't see doing that because it never happened, so the charm of Her Majesty being the hidden track is just cool with me. Now, on to my story of Abbey Road. I have a long history with this album going back to the 1980s. This was one of the first cassettes I purchased, and of course I played the hell out of it before I got my first CD player when I was 13 years old, and I built up the Beatles catalog on CD. And as I was building my vinyl collection up in high school, I got an original copy of the album for a few bucks. It's not in the greatest shape, but I still have it today. And I never went out to find an upgrade. And of course I got the album again on CD when the new remasters came out. Out of all of this, I asked myself, why did I never upgrade my vinyl copy? Why I haven't purchased a new vinyl copy like I have some of the other Beatles albums. Until I did my research and took a look within, I couldn't get a real answer. Abbey Road is a great album, and it's held in high reverence by many Beatles fans worldwide, but for me, it's not one of my favorite Beatles albums. For better or worse, the Lennon and McCartney tracks were always the driving force behind the Beatles albums and most of their singles. The relationship between Lennon and McCartney at the end of the Beatles was fractured, and they were not as strong unit like they were in the past, but this is natural as people grow up. These two guys found a level of success, critical acclaim, and reaching the peak of their profession at a very young age. Being a Beatle was a real grind for these four guys. Look at their career arc, and by the time the Abbey Road project was underway, they were kind of done. Out out of all the four, Paul seemed to enjoy the Beatles more than the rest, as he wanted to keep things together one last time. But his investment in the band and in the process didn't seem to be shared by the rest of the group. Lennon and McCartney did have their moments of shine on Abbey Road, but then there were also some clunkers here. And the medley for me as a whole was not some of their best work lyrically, as the songs are not complete to their own admission, though it did have some bright spots, and the medley at times can be fatiguing for me to listen to. And in fact, there have been times where I just listened to side one, and Here Comes the Sun, and Because, and You Never Give Me Your Money on side two, and that's a wrap. But there's times when I'm in the mood to listen to Abbey Road, and it's an absolute joy. I especially enjoy George's work on this album. It's a nice prelude into his first post-Beatles work, All Things Must Pass. In 1969, George was ready to be unleashed. Ringo's track Octopus's Garden is also some of his finest writing, and I gained a greater appreciation for this track as I gave it more of a proper listen and really took in the lyrics and understood what Ringo may have been feeling at this time. Taking Abbey Road from a prog angle is something I never considered as well, but for as inconsistent as I find the medley, I can applaud the Beatles for taking a chance and doing something a bit different. Abbey Road didn't birth prog by any means, but I don't have a problem with throwing the ideas and some of the sounds into a pre-prog bucket. The Beatles just had the idea of taking most of the side of an album and creating a mini opus, and laid some of the groundwork for this progressive rock, and possibly gave the record companies and artists permission to explore their own musical boundaries. And thankfully they did, because bands like Yes, Genesis, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and Rush, just to name a few, took the full side opus and created some musical masterpieces. In closing, I always considered Abbey Road to be a sad album, as this was the end of the Beatles, but I take a different view of this album today. I see Abbey Road as the emancipation of John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Richard Starkey from the Beatles. It was cool. They were able to get together one last time to make an album that ended up turning out pretty great, considering only Paul seemed to be 100% invested in the project. John had his moments where he wasn't playing on the tracks and he was looking to take his art into other directions. George for sure had his mind on putting an end to his Beatles obligations so he can work on his own projects, and Ringo had other career interests as well. Paul, in turn, was able to gain freedom to work in the way he wanted to work. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Church of Rock Show. I'm working out the kinks and hope to get this show more polished as the weeks go on. I appreciate you for sticking with me while I work through each episode. Please subscribe to the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. Right now, the show is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, and Podbean. If there is another platform you use, please share this with me, and I will work on getting the show there too. Share the show with a friend. Word of mouth goes a long way to grow the show. Visit the show at churchofrockshow.com and check out the show notes pages underneath the podcast section of the site for bonus material such as videos, photos, and direct links to listen to the albums on Spotify and Apple Music. Also, check us out on social media on Facebook and Instagram at Church of Rock Show, and on Twitter at Church of Rock 75. And special thanks to Hyde for providing the theme music for the Church of Rock Show. And check out and support his work at soundcloud.com/David Hyde Music. And until next time, I will catch you for another episode of the Church of Rock Show.